listening to the Fantasy Takeaway Podcast with Murphy Hamilton and Joe Pollock. Proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Subscribe, listen, take home the title.
What's up, Takeaway Nation? Thank you for being here. Welcome into our Week 12 preview episode. Jeff, Joe, I got a weird one to start this show out. A little bit of news that caught my eye. Le'Veon Bell has come out publicly saying that he is done submitting to random HGH testing by the NFL after 5 different submissions this season. When asked if he would refuse to comply, he stated, "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Now, the reason I bring that up is because while Bell hasn't been stellar this season, he is still getting a bell cow workload. And when healthy, I mean, he's pretty solid. So he could have been a trade target for many fantasy owners, and he could have been somebody you're stashing for late season and playoff schedule. Is this alarming to y'all?
I would say yes, it is alarming to me. They might just not have him submit anymore if he's already done it 5 times this year randomly, but that's not a risk I'm super willing to take because they could suspend him indefinitely if he won't submit to that testing.
You know, I'm not really alarmed by it. I think he's going to submit to the test if there's a test, because at the end of the day, there's enough verbiage in NFL contracts that if he fails these tests, whether it's through submission or non-submission, he's still going to lose pay. He's worked too hard to get that contract that he was, holding out an entire year to give it away by not submitting to a test. And if he doesn't submit to the test, it's going to tell us everything we need to know. And that's he's on the juice anyway. So, realistically, I'm not that alarmed because I think he's going to submit to the test. I think it'll all be fine.
Without this news, I got an interesting question from a listener today. Le'Veon Bell trade for Kenny Golladay and Austin Eckler. He has Le'Veon Bell. Do you guys think that's a trade you would consider at this point in the season?
I would, personally.
Le'Veon Bell for Golladay and who? I'm sorry?
Austin Eckler.
Man, I love me some Austin Eckler. I really do. I think he's the more explosive back, but I'm concerned about Golladay. And it's only because it's not Golladay. Galladay's great. He's been a top, 14, 16 wide receiver this year. I just wonder if Driscoll's going to keep that going. The Lions have no reason to rush Stafford back. I might just sit on Bell and see if I can get a more functional wide receiver or see if I can get a bump up at that running back spot, someone with more opportunity.
You do have to be a little bit concerned about the quality of targets with Jeff Driscoll, but the percentage on targets doesn't change hardly at all. He's still getting a 19.6% target share in those 75 snaps that Driscoll has played. The amount of targets is not a concern.
Yeah, and he may be, this week or next week. I just wonder about, now that teams have a little bit of film on Driscoll, like, how do they just go ahead and take away a toy? If they say, hey, we're just going to shut down Golladay and we're going to make Driscoll beat us by going other guys.
It's got to be Marvin Jones, though, at that point, though, right?
Right, but then the question becomes, like, are you willing to take that risk when it's a quarterback who probably isn't the kind of guy that's going to go beat number one coverage and maybe won't be able to overcome having his top guy taken away?
I advised this guy not to take the trade, and it wasn't because I didn't think it was a good trade, but I do think that he was already stacked at wide receiver, so it turned into more of a roster construction question than an actual trade question. I thought the trade was totally fair.
Oh, I think so. I think it's fair. And if we were looking at this 6 weeks ago, I think it's a no-brainer. I still would have done it. But I'm just right now, it's the Driscoll thing that does throw it for me. I don't trust him. He's not an elite level backup quarterback by any means.
I take it. I mean, I'm a little biased. I've been kind of pounding the table in the show that we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from the inevitable Melvin Gordon late season injury. I don't care if he started late in the season. It's a trend. But I also like Kenny Golladay, and I think that if the trade deadline's still not past that league, there's a chance he could flip Golladay for something too. Like if you can get Austin Eckler, who still gets a decent amount of the targets in that offense, who's still a good tool in that offense with potential of being an RB1 if Gordon goes down, which is not out of the realm of possibility, and you get somebody you can piece in another trade and get another better running back, I consider doing it. It really just depends on his willingness to work trades after this trade.
I think we're running right up on the trade deadline. Most of the leagues that I play in, I saw it was on ESPN. Most of the leagues I play in, the trade deadline is on November 22nd. So it would be tough to get a trade done after this one because it's the 20th as we're recording this.
Yeah, given his running back situation, it's better off not taking that deal.
All right, guys. Well, let's dive into the show. There's no actual news, so we're going to start out with some injury roundup.
Injury roundup.
All right, first up, a note, teams on bye this week, Arizona, Kansas City, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Minnesota Vikings. This is also the last week of byes, so thank God. I hate byes.
What's really interesting here when I look at this group, though, there's 3 quarterbacks that are off this week that you might have been playing every week. Kyler Murray, Pat Mahomes, and potentially Kirk Cousins.
The running backs are insane too, man. Like Kenyon Drake has been usable. Both of the Chargers backs have been very usable since Melvin Gordon got back to 100%. Dalvin Cook. The Kansas City backfield has kind of been a mess, but they've all been usable from time to time. This is apocalypse for running backs.
Well, wide receiver is kind of a thing, too. I mean, Keenan Allen's been a little rough the last few weeks, but you have Diggs is gone. Thielen, of course, has been hurt. Hill only just got hurt, but you lose all the Chiefs wideouts. Christian Kirk is now off the board. There's a lot of fantasy implications this particular week, and there's playoff brackets that are being solidified right now. So I really hope the owners of a lot of these players have already managed to load up their roster with plenty of depth.
Yeah, you need a ton, too. Look at the tight ends that we're missing, too. Travis Kelce and Hunter Henry are on this list, too. And Kyle Rudolph has been like an elite streamer lately. Yeah. This sucks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you mentioned Tyreek Hill, Jeff. He's not going to be on this injury roundup, but it's kind of notable because he got hurt in last week's game. They say he had an MRI. It's nothing too serious, but the bye week being right here is actually really good for him. They don't expect him to miss any time. He should be good to go next week. I think fantasy owners should breathe a sigh of relief that Kansas City's on the bye right now.
Sure. I mean, I have Hill on one dynasty roster and got him and Kupp. Kupp hasn't shown up the last 3 or 4 weeks. I don't really know where he's been. And now Tyreek Hill having a bye week. It's really, really hurting my soul right now.
Kupp has been in the land of Jared Goff. That's not a fun place to be.
The weird part is Jared Goff was good these last few weeks comparatively. It's when good Jared Goff is bad for Cooper Kupp and bad Jared Goff is good for Cooper Kupp.
Well, I'm going to need some more bad Jared Goff stat.
All right, guys, let's start with players that are out. It's a short list. Marlon Mack, who we'll get into in a little bit with our Thursday night preview, and Juju Smith-Schuster. Joe, you had some notes on him, right?
It's more about Vance McDonald than it is about Juju Smith-Schuster. When Juju Smith-Schuster is off the field this year, it's a pretty small sample size, but Vance McDonald's target share increases to 33%. That's like beyond elite. That's DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones level target share. So I think if you're looking at streaming tight end, it's a pretty good matchup this week. You could do a lot worse than Vance McDonald if he's out there.
All right, moving on to players that are trending in the wrong direction. Jordan Howard, James Conner, Devontae Freeman, Austin Hooper, Auden Tate, Evan Ingram, Philip Dorsett, Mohamed Sanu, Alshon Jeffrey, and Robert Woods. I want to start with Robert Woods. He's missing time for personal reasons, missed last week's game for personal reasons. We still don't know what's going on, and the longer he goes this week without practicing, missing time, the less likely he'll play this weekend, and that's absolutely terrifying for fantasy owners.
Yeah, Bobby Trees seems to be, shrouded in some kind of mystery here. Another one of those guys where if they're not going to tell us what's going on, it might be pretty serious, and you should probably plan to not have him. And if he's available, it's a pleasant surprise, but I would definitely plan as if he's not playing this week.
And grab you some Josh Reynolds, because if Robert Woods misses again, Josh Reynolds turns into a legitimate fantasy play, especially if Brandon Cooks misses too. That team is really thin at wide receiver. And Reynolds is a pretty good receiver. He's buried on the depth chart behind 3 really, really good receivers, but he's pretty good.
Yeah, I think he's really good. And there's actually a potential to see a few more looks for Gerald Everett too, because he's a guy they can split out and use in all kinds of different ways. So I think Reynolds and Everett are going to be big beneficiaries if there's no Cooks and no Robert Woods.
Another tight end that's really going to be affected here with these players is Alshon Jeffrey. If Alshon Jeffrey is out, Dallas Goedert is actually basically a wide receiver, or maybe Zach Ertz is a wide receiver, but they're both on the field all the time. So it's one of those situations where you can play Dallas Goedert if Alshon Jeffrey is out in DFS or in season long. Don't be afraid.
I've got Ertz in the fishbowl, and I'm going to really need that to not be true. I'm going to need like 75, pass attempts all thrown at Zach Ertz.
Denied.
See, it's not a problem for either of them because they're basically getting the wide receiver target share. I love both plays this week. I think Ertz and Goedert, you could play Ertz and Goedert on the same team.
Yeah, I don't have that.
I don't either, but in DFS, it would be a really interesting contrarian stack.
I mean, I'm just saying, when Zach doesn't get the looks, it really hurts.
Oh, God. Jeff, come on.
Jeff, I'm going to institute a new rule. You get 3 of those jokes a show. If you make more than 3 bad jokes, we're cutting you off.
Dude, I mean, that's 1. So we're only at 1. I mean, and we're like a third of the way through this almost. Like, I think I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm running a real good pace right now.
So let's just talk about these Patriot wide receivers, guys. Phillip Dorsett, Mohamed Sanu, trending in the wrong direction. What does this do for that wide receiving core? N'Keal Harry?
I think N'Keal Harry might be in play. I think what it definitely does is it moves Julian Edelman into an elite target share on that offense. And James White is a guy that you seriously have to consider with these pass catchers out, because his role could turn more into a Z receiver than actually being a running back in this game. And that wouldn't surprise me one bit.
All right, moving on to players that are trending in the right direction, but may not play. Kind of one of those, we're not 100% sure yet. Will Fuller, T.Y. Hilton, Brandon Cooks, Sterling Shepard, George Kittle, Emmanuel Sanders, and Deebo Samuels, the 49er guys, Tyler Lockett, and Delaney Walker. Jeff, how confident are you that George Kittle and Emmanuel Sanders play this week at 100%?
That they play at 100%?
Or they play close?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to say 0% confident in that they'll be fully 100%. If either of them play, they'll be sub 100%, but probably well enough to still put up some decent numbers. At this point in the season, you can't expect really anybody to ever get to a true 100%. Well enough to play, well enough to produce. I am still a little worried about both guys because I worry about lower leg injuries, because it looked like Kittle had not only the bruise, but it looked like he was limping a little bit on that knee. I think we talked about it a little bit Monday. It seems a little more concerning. I want to see him running comfortably before I can get excited. When you have Emmanuel Sanders, he's just an older player. I don't know that he's going to snap back and recover as well, especially with where he was taking those hits. He got lumped up pretty seriously against Seattle, and I really need to know that he's also running comfortably, frankly, that he's running and breathing the right way so that he can go ahead and get the separation he needs to be a useful part in our offense.
He fell on the ball pretty darn hard in that Arizona game, too. So he's a guy you definitely have to be concerned about. Brandon Cooks is also a guy that I wanted to talk about quickly. If he gets through the concussion protocol and Robert Woods doesn't get on the field, we could be seeing a major bounce back for Brandon Cooks.
My dynasty team would really appreciate that, Joe. Let's will that into existence.
Dude, my first 3 picks in one of my leagues were Saquon Barkley, T.Y. Hilton, and Brandon Cooks. Those are situations you can't get through. I need both of those guys back to even salvage the season.
Goodness gracious.
It's rough. It's a hard knock life.
Yep.
That should be your team name now.
All right. I'll change it right now.
It's 1.5, Jeff. It's 1.5.
It's like 1.25. 1.25. Come on. Maybe even, might not even be a quarter.
All right. And guys likely to play that kind of popped up on the injury report this week, Josh Jacobs and Deontay Johnson. I want to point out Deontay Johnson first, because we talked about this in the pre-show, and it was kind of surprising when I looked it up for Joe that he is already practicing full, even though he's not 100% out of the concussion protocol.
It's a strong possibility that he passes through the concussion protocol tomorrow or even on Friday. So he's a guy that, I mean, with Juju out, we don't have a real good sample size of Juju out, Deontay Johnson in, but I would assume his target share would increase massively.
Yeah, we've got to keep an eye on that, because if he is questionable, or even if he's playing at sub 100% and you've got no Juju, James Washington might be a guy who could make a little bit of noise. He's a flyer for DFS that might be worth a look this week if it turns out Deontay's not playing.
What's the other guy's name? Johnny Holton?
Yeah, the deep threat, Johnny Holton. Good grief.
Thought it was Marcus Wheaton.
Oh, no. Johnny Holton's playing the Marcus Wheaton role this week.
And this week, playing Marcus Wheaton is, wait, let me look at the roster, Johnny Holton.
I had to make the comment. We haven't talked about the Marcus Wheaton role in a couple weeks, so we have to bring that back every once in a while.
Wheaton.
We need to get that jersey framed.
You're right, I do. Oh, man. Any worry about Josh Jacobs?
No, he's been on the injury report like this for weeks. He's got that shoulder thing. It could be an issue mid-game, but it's not something that I'm worried enough about to take him out of my lineups.
The trouble with NFL injury reports is that they can be played quite a bit. His shoulder's probably totally fine. I could imagine John Gruden doing some things that Belichick does. Tom Brady, I think, has actually been on the Patriots injury report since like 2008. So I don't know if I'll put a lot of weight into a Jacobs injury unless, I see him in a sling or he's suddenly not practicing a couple of days in a row.
Now, if you want to take him out of your lineup because you're stacked at running backs and you realize that the Jets are a low-key elite run defense, I'm fine with that. But he should be getting the volume for that not to be a huge issue. It's unlikely he'll get that spike week.
So here's a question. I'll throw this out there before we move on. If you've got Josh Jacobs and your other running backs are, I don't know, let's just say you somehow have one of the elite guys, Cook, McCaffrey, Saquon, one of those guys, you're obviously going to start them. Would you play Kareem Hunt over Josh Jacobs, knowing he's got the Miami matchup in a PPR?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't start Cooks because he is out.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Yeah, fine. We talked about that. Damn it.
I think the question is legit either way, though, and I would start Kareem Hunt over Josh Jacobs this week. Just because the Jets are giving up like 3.2 yards per attempt to running backs. And they've played some tough ones, and they've shut them down.
And Kareem Hunt's playing the Dolphins.
And Kareem Hunt's getting like 8 or 9 targets a game.
Right. And that's kind of where I wanted to make sure we set kind of a bar for the listeners. So when they hear, well, I've got Josh Jacobs, wait a minute, what do you mean? Maybe I shouldn't play him and I might play somebody else. But like, what about James White? Would you play White over Jacobs right now?
I don't think so. I think there's too much variability in that offense to be able to trust him any more than you'd trust Jacobs.
Okay. Perfect.
All right. And finally, one last note before we get out of injury roundup. Christian McCaffrey didn't take a Wednesday off this week. It's not normal. So I just want to throw that in there.
Maybe he actually was having a nagging injury and that thing is over and he's actually going to be better than he has been so far this season.
If we've seen C-Mac playing through injury, I'm terrified.
55-point fantasy weeks to finish out the season. I'm down. Let's do it. I have so much CMC. I'd be so down.
I feel so dumb for telling people to take Saquon Barkley over him at number 1.
See, I feel stupid for that a little bit, but Saquon Barkley basically has been injured for the entire season. So it's one of those things where like running back is just a position that gets injured, and that's what happened this year.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't run into that quite as much in 2018. 17 felt really bad. 18 seemed pretty clean, and now 19 seems really rough again.
18 just waited until the playoffs.
That's what it was.
It was the worst.
Cheap dates.
All right, starting off with quarterbacks. Jeff, this week you played Nick Foles. Joe, you have Baker Mayfield, and I chose Sam Darnold. Let's focus mainly on Joe on this one because I think we all consensus wanted to play Baker Mayfield. You just beat us to it.
I wouldn't actually be all that opposed to us just all claiming Baker Mayfield as our cheap date this week and going all in because he's in a fantastic spot. Both of these teams run a ton of plays per game. We can project this thing for like 130, maybe up to 140 plays per game. There's a chance the thing shoots out. If I'm playing DFS this week and I want to throw a tournament stack in there with Dolphins and Browns, I'll do it. I'm totally down to do that. Like Devontae Parker is a play that you can make this week.
Ooh, you think he gets Denzel Ward though?
Maybe. They haven't really been shadowing all that much, so I think that it's a viable play either way.
Gotcha.
All right, on to running backs. Jeff, you picked Benny Snell this week. Joe, you have Darius Geis, and I picked Tariq Cohen. Jeff, Benny Snell.
Yeah, he's getting healthy, and it's possible he's ready to play again this week. And with all of the pass catchers hurt, I feel like Jalen Samuels is going to be relegated to more of that pass catching role. There's some talk, depending on where you get your news from, that Jalen Samuels would still be the clear-cut one. I don't know if that's true because he hasn't really run that well. He's caught a ton of passes and had a ton of targets, but Benny Snell has looked better between the tackles. He's shown more explosion, better ability to cut in traffic. I think he could be the guy that actually leads the team in rushing yards and might be more inclined to get a rushing touchdown if he plays.
You were too nice to Jalen Samuels there, Jeff. He hasn't just been not that good. He has been awful as a running back. He's been good as a wide receiver and as a receiver out of the backfield, but awful between the tackles.
Well, I mean, I tried to stop a couple steps shy of saying he's been just piss poor, but, I was trying to be political. I'm trying to be nice. I don't know.
Don't do that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no politics on this show, Jeff.
Wrong channel. Shit, I'm on the wrong pod. I forgot. I don't know where I am. I blacked out. What day is it?
All right, Joe, Darius Geis, I kind of feel was also consensus. I don't know about Joe's opinion, but I typed in Darius Geis into the spreadsheet, and then I realized you had him and had to pivot. So any comments on Darius Geis?
It's a little concerning that he only played 30% of the snaps last week, but it was his first week back in action. The Lions are an elite matchup. They're giving up a ton of points to every running back they're facing. I don't think it's an elite play, but at 4,700, if he plays 50% of the snaps and gets half of the work out of that backfield, he could easily 4X you on that with a touchdown.
Like last week, one big play.
Yep.
All right, and mine was Tariq Cohen, and I just want to mention this. Joe threw the stat at me. Like I believe he said it last week too. His target share increased to 20% with Trubisky out in 2018. So with Chase Daniels in that offense, I'm all in on Tariq Cohen right now.
I added him in one league just because I was ahead of the guy I'm playing this week on the waiver priority. I didn't need him. He's like my fifth running back, but he needed a back this week, and so I stole him just to block him.
Yeah, in terms of redraft, everybody is picking up and spending a ton of fab on Bo Scarborough, Jonathan Williams, and then like kind of sneaking through with Jordan Wilkins afterwards. If Tariq Cohen's out there, he's a better play than any of those guys this week.
Yeah, agreed. I actually look at that Colts lineup where people are talking about Williams. I don't know that he's going to be the clear-cut one. I started kind of looking at that situation again, and that feels like a big-time committee, and I don't love it. I don't know if I love any of those backs. Maybe Nyheim Hines, because at least his role is pretty clearly defined. He's not going to get you a ton of love, but I mean, if you're in a particularly deep league, call it 16 teams or something, and you're starting a few backs, he's a guy I would play over the other two right now.
The assumption when I talked about Jonathan Williams last week was that he was a 1 week 16 to 20 touch guy if Jordan Wilkins missed. Jordan Wilkins practiced in full on Wednesday, so like that's dead.
Yep.
All right, on to wide receivers. Jeff, you had Randall Cobb. Joe, you have Tim Patrick, and I chose Hunter Renfrow. Jeff, I want to start with you, Randall Cobb against the Patriots.
The Patriots defense has been shutting people down like gangbusters most of the year. And I'm going to go into this a little bit further in my what to watch for, but I feel like they're going to spend a lot of time and effort, locking down Amari, Zeke, and Gallup, that the lost man in that equation becomes Randall Cobb. And he's really carved out a nice role. He's had, I want to say 7, 8, and 8 targets in the last 3 weeks, 2 of those weeks going over 100 yards. This could be a third week in a row at over 100.
Pro Football Focus, for the record, has that matchup as minus 31% for Cobb. Jonathan Jones has been playing really well for the Patriots. So buyer beware.
I'll take the Wiley bet. I feel comfortable with it.
Sure.
All right, Joe, I know you're excited about this one. Tim Patrick, go.
This might sound like a homer call because I'm a Broncos fan, but we're looking at a guy in Tim Patrick that got 8 targets last week, played 70+% of the snaps, and he is minimum priced for a wide receiver on DraftKings. They didn't even have him in the player pool last week, so I think DraftKings is behind on this. It's kind of a risky play. There's a chance he goes 0 for 0 and 0. But if he gets you 3 catches for 45 yards and a touchdown, he's hit 4X value. If he gets you 5 for 50 and a touchdown, he's over 5X. So he's a guy that I'm going to roll out in cash because the pricing is so tight this week, and I want to play guys like Christian McCaffrey and Michael Thomas. It's a risky play, but I think it's going to pay off.
I like it. Doesn't sound homer at all, even though I'm a homer too.
I like it because it's a coconuts play. You got to have some coconuts to make that play. I like it.
A little bit, but there's certainly upside. Like there's downside. The floor is scary, but the upside is massive.
Well, coconuts infers that at least it has upside and there's something to it. If there was no upside and you were doing this, it would just be stupid.
Coconuts in your head.
Or upside the head.
Sure. That's not funny, though. You're more likely to die from getting hit in the head with a coconut than you are of like a snake bite, shark attack. That's scary stuff.
I'm going to need to see the numbers on that. And I know you've probably already looked them up. So we're going to Nat Geo that up on the next pod here.
I'll put them in the show notes.
Perfect.
Oh, Lord. All right. And my only notes on Hunter Renfrow, he's getting a good amount of targets. He's very good in that offense. And I honestly think this is a pretty solid matchup. Joe, you mentioned earlier how the Jets are pretty good against the run, but they can be passed on. And I think Hunter Renfrow has a pretty solid day. So I feel like it was a safe, cheap date.
Yeah, they're a total pass funnel. I like that whole passing offense for the Oakland. I think that like Tyrell Williams is a really solid play too. He's not a cheap date, but I think he's very playable.
All right, at tight end, Jeff, you have Mike Gesicki. Joe, you have Vance McDonald, and I picked Darren Fells. Joe, I know you want to focus on Vance McDonald with this one, so shoot.
I already kind of mentioned it. Juju Smith-Schuster has already been ruled out. Vance McDonald's target share goes up to 33%. This is a solid matchup anyway for Vance McDonald at 3,500. I think he's straight up mispriced. I think he's a closer to $4,000 or $4,200 player, and you're getting him for $3,500.
All right, then on to defenses. Jeff and Joe, you both picked the Bengals defense. So sticking with the same first letter and the same defense this week. And I chose the Seahawks. Are we dart throwing here?
Yeah, a little bit. There aren't a whole lot of good cheap plays at defense. That's kind of why we had to let Jeff pick the same one as me or me pick the same one as Jeff, however you want to look at it. But the Bengals have upside. This isn't like a total punt play where you're just hoping you don't get a 0 or a negative. They're playing against Mason Rudolph without Juju Smith-Schuster. It's not a great game theory play in my lineup to play the tight end against the defense, but I think there's plenty of upside for turnovers. Mason Rudolph is just a bad quarterback.
I only took them because it was all I could afford after I filled in my pay up guys. And so that's where I was at. I was kind of relegated to the Bengals at this point. And yeah, there's a little bit of upside for some turnovers because, yeah, Mason Rudolph is pretty terrible. But, I mean, you can't argue with the price. I mean, $2,100, it's about as low as it gets.
Well, $1,500 for Arizona last week was as low as it gets.
I don't think I scrolled down that far. Good grief.
But yeah, I love how DK is pricing the defenses down like this. It's so nice because some of them are legitimately bad plays if they're going to be 2,500, but no defense is unplayable if they're going to go down to 15.
Right.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to start with you. Final thoughts on your full lineup, not just your sheep dates.
In terms of full lineup, this is probably one of the lineups I'm most excited about to play all year. You combine Foles and Snell, who I think are reasonable plays. I managed to pay up for Kamara, Julio, Golden Tate, who I think are all in great spots to play, and then Pepper and Saquon on the flex. This whole lineup is going to be pretty strong. I feel very good about my chances this week.
All right, Joe, your final lineup.
3 of my favorite plays this week are Christian McCaffrey, Michael Thomas, and Kareem Hunt. And I got them all in this lineup pretty easily. So it's one of those things with that Tim Patrick pay down, you can really play some elite options. This thing doesn't look anything like my cash lineup, but it's a little bit close in terms of the pay up players. There's some really good options out there.
All right, and with mine, Joe, you and I both have C-Mac in. I mentioned it last week. C-Mac is just one of those guys where if you can pay down at other positions and play him, I'm going to do it all the time now. I feel like it's one of the safest plays in fantasy. Jamison Crowder's in my final lineup. I love the kid. And again, he's got a safe floor. He's getting tons of targets. If he catches a touchdown and gets you 6 or 7 catches, you're having a good one. And I paid up for Derrick Henry in my flex spot. This is the time of year where Derrick Henry starts to smash. The Titans start to really use him and run and run and run. And he could have an easy 200-yard, 2-touchdown game. I mean, heck, even 120 yards and a touchdown. I'm feeling really good about that. Derrick Henry, late in the year, feels like a good smash spot.
I'm really on Derrick Henry this week. I think that's a super good play.
Yeah. All right, that'll do it for our cheap dates. May the best man win, gentlemen.
I will.
Thanks.
Oh, confident there, are you? Oh, man. We need to wipe that smirk off his face, Jeff.
I mean, I don't know. I'm feeling really good about my lineup. This is as good as I've felt about one of my cheap dates lineups probably in about a month.
Me too. I'm putting this thing in a GPP. I think there's just enough contrarian play and just enough, like with Tim Patrick, unless the industry starts to really roll on Tim Patrick, I think he could be one of those tournament winning kind of plays.
Ooh.
Hot take. All right, guys, let's dive into our Thursday night preview.
Thursday night preview. Colts versus Texans.
Let's start out with the injuries. We've already mentioned these guys, T.Y. Hilton, Will Fuller, and Marlon Mack. Mack is out. Fuller and Hilton are both questionable, but likely to play. So that's good for fantasy owners, especially me with T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, me too, man. There are so many teams I have T.Y. Hilton on, and he was so good at the beginning of the year, and these injuries have just derailed his season.
All right, let's move into the quarterbacks in this game. Jacoby Brissett and Deshaun Watson. Is this a bounce back week for Deshaun Watson? I mean, last week against the Ravens, it was just a really rough week. We expected a shootout, didn't get one. This game feels closer to that shootout than last week's does.
Yeah, I don't think it's an all-out shootout. The over-under in Vegas right now is 45.5. That's good, not great. We've got the Texans favored by 3.5, or 4.5 right now. So I think it's a good spot. He's not a guy that I'd probably play in DFS because I want the guy that's chasing, especially in tournaments. But I think you could do a lot worse. It sucks this game isn't on the main slate this week. It's going to be a nice game.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that, and we're getting obviously to wide receivers, but I'm hoping that Deshaun can find, our guy, Nuke Hopkins, just a little bit. And that'll obviously tilt the scales for him a little bit more. If he can find Hopkins and get him 100 yards and a touch, he's going to end up having a brilliant day. But if he doesn't get Hopkins involved, then he's going to be, better than last week, but he won't be the elite level play that we've been looking for.
Man, on the Jacoby Brissett side, the T.Y. Hilton return would be absolutely fantastic. Their pass success rate goes up by like 8%. Their run success rate goes up by like 13%. Their turnover percent goes down by like 1.5%. It's really solid if T.Y. Hilton can come back. I would love to see this game shoot out.
All right, let's move into running backs. For the Colts, we have Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Williams. For the Texans, Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson. I am not excited about these running backs. There's probably going to be one or two guys that has a great game. I honestly don't know who it's going to be.
I'm not playing any of them. I really was excited about Jonathan Williams if Jordan Wilkins didn't play, but with that full session that he got in, there's just no way that you can play. Maybe you can play Nyheim Hines. They probably will be chasing in this game, so he might be an okay play, but I would probably steer clear of all of them.
If you forced me to pick one, I'll take Hines. But when I look at these four guys that we just talked about or just mentioned here, only two words come to mind, and that's hard pass.
If you're streaming one, which one would you pick? Because all of these guys are probably on the waiver wire. It's Hines,
yeah,
right?
It's Hines. It's absolutely Hines because now, okay, we'll qualify this. If you're in a PPR, it's Hines. If you're playing, even half PPR, it's Hines. If you're playing standard, where it's basically, touchdown heavy, no points per reception, etc., then I might be willing to go Hyde or Jonathan Williams because one of them will get some touches near the goal line and have probably a higher touchdown probability, but they don't have a lot of yardage upside.
This is something that we probably should have mentioned on the last show, but if Jordan Wilkins is still out there on the waiver wire and you have a free bench spot, you should pick him up because Jonathan Williams was a guy everybody was spending $70 on and they weren't even looking at Jordan Wilkins. He could be the lead first and second down back in that offense. Like that's what he was before he was injured and before Mac got injured.
Wouldn't that be something? Everybody spends their money on Williams and then it's Wilkins. It's kind of like last year.
Ty Johnson, Bo Scarborough, like it happens all the time.
Remember the Chiefs last year? It wasn't Damian Williams everybody went and spent their money on.
Yep.
They went out and spent their money on was it Spencer Ware? And I think it might have been Darrell Williams and somebody else. And a few select people grabbed Damian out of the gate, and those were the lucky championship winners.
Yep, that was me.
Say me too. I got Damian Williams last year for $1.
I picked him up off free agency. Waivers had already passed, and nobody picked him up. I was like, I'll take that.
Yeah. Well, in our league, you have to. So if you even pick up a free agent, you still have to give up $1. It's so you still have to give up something. But it kind of keeps some of those guys in check that make just endless roster moves. But that's a smart play. I like the Wilkins strategy there.
All right, on to wide receivers. You got T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal, and Chester Rogers as the big names for the Colts, and DeAndre Hopkins, Kenny Stills, and potentially Will Fuller for the Texans. I mean, you're obviously playing DeAndre Hopkins, and if T.Y. Hilton plays, I feel like you can't bench him if you've had him on your roster all season. The rest of these guys, though, any interest?
No, not at all. Because if you look at what happens when T.Y. Hilton is on the field, we have a significant sample size both directions. In split, we've got 323 snaps. Out of split, we have 270 snaps. When T.Y. Hilton is on the field, Zach Pascal gets an 8% target share. Chester Rogers, 5.5%. These guys are unplayable if T.Y. Hilton is out there because Zach Pascal was 15.9% with T.Y. Hilton out. That's a drop of almost 8%. That's insane.
Is Paris Campbell still hurt? What's going on with that guy?
Paris Campbell broke his hand and had surgery, so he'll be out another few weeks at least.
Gotcha. Well, next year when he gets a full off season in and he's a second-year player, can we refer to the Colts receivers as Paris Hilton?
Yes, of course we can.
That's two.
No, veto. Absolute veto.
Yeah.
But it's an old joke. He made it like 2 weeks ago. That's 2.
No.
You've been outnumbered, though. It's a good enough joke to reuse.
It was a similar joke. I had just come to the realization that when you put them together, they could create Paris Hilton. Because I'm slow.
Yeah, I feel like I spelled that one out for you on that episode.
You did. Well, you actually put them next to each other on the script, or you guys had them right next to you. I was like, holy that's Paris Hilton. As far as the Texans receivers, though, I'm not touching Fuller coming off an injury. I need to see him come back healthy and be really healthy. And Stills, he's the guy to lean on if you desperately need a receiver, but obviously Nuke's getting all the looks. God willing.
If you're playing the Thursday, Monday slate, how interested are you in DeAndre Hopkins for DFS?
No, I'm good. There's
enough.
In the elite category, there's a handful of other guys I like better. I love Julio this week. I love Mike Thomas this week. Those are if you're going to pay up, go get one of those two guys. I'm a big Hopkins fan, huge fan. He should have had the huge bust out against the Colts a few weeks back. This might be that game, but man, Thursday Night Football always scares me. I just don't get involved.
He had 28.6 last time he played the Colts. He's only 7,500.
It should have been 45.
Still, I mean, at 7,500, I think if you're playing Thursday, Monday, he's a guy you should be considering. But I agree. I like Michael Thomas better. I probably like Julio Jones better, but that's a weird game.
All right. And finally, the tight ends for this game, Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron on the Colts side and Darren Fells for the Texans. I mean, obviously, I'm playing Darren Fells as my cheap date. I think that the Texans can get some points at the tight end position. And Eric Ebron and Jack Doyle have been decently productive. Are you guys streaming any of these guys?
I don't think so. If T.Y. Hilton is in fact back, the target share goes down for both Ebron and Doyle. Fells, I think, is an okay dart throw, but if you take away his touchdowns this year, he has been completely underwhelming. I think that there are better options out there probably than these guys, but I wouldn't argue with the Fells play. I think there's plenty of touchdown upside.
Yeah, I mainly went with it because, and I'm going to shout out Full-Time Fantasy on their FF Toolbox, but Indianapolis is ranked 9th in points given to tight ends, 53 receptions, 495 yards, 4 touchdowns. It's a pretty good defense to play against as far as tight ends, so I like that dart throw personally.
He fits into the category with guys like Vance McDonald. Vance McDonald scored 14 points against them. You've got to be a little concerned when guys like Travis Kelce only get you 11, but Noah Fant had 7.6. I don't think it's a terrible play, but I think that I'm probably going another direction.
Yeah, 2 of these 3 guys are way too touchdown dependent. Ebron needs touchdowns because he doesn't necessarily get volume. Fells is all touchdowns. And then, I mean, if you have a problem, you call Jack Doyle, but I'm not calling him if T.Y. Hilton's back.
Yeah, his problem is T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys, final call. Who do you think wins? Colts, Texans?
I'm going with the Texans, but I think this is going to be a close game. I think we're gonna have an entertaining Thursday night game unless we have one of those poopers for the away team.
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the referees decide it, and there's going to be a late controversy, and the Colts are going to win.
See, I'm down with that. I'm tired of the controversy, though. Like, can we just get officials that know what they're doing?
I listen to a lot of Sirius XM. The NFL Network on there's almost always on my radio in my car. I was listening to Moving the Chains with Pat Kerwin, and he had a really radical idea. What he proposed is that the NFL take the lead official off the field and put him in the replay box and take the replay guy and put him back on the field. So he's able to properly develop the other officials by seeing what's going on the field and saying, hey, you know what? You called this as a PI. We're going to go ahead and pick that flag up. We're going to overturn that one. It's no big deal, and we'll take care of it. The problem is the lead guy is on the field not getting the best look, and the guy in the box isn't the most experienced referee, and he's making the wrong calls. And now our guy on the field isn't properly positioned to make the right call. So New York is all messed up. They don't have it right. But if you flip that script, it empowers the lead on every refereeing crew to start making the right call and making it easier, which I thought was a really cool idea. I don't know the NFL will ever go for it, but man, that would potentially take a lot of controversy out of a lot of these games.
I think also they need to put an earpiece in all of the officials' ears so that they can have two-way communication with that guy in the box, because they might have seen something that we're not seeing on the replay. They can say, I did see that. I was in position to see that the ball didn't hit the ground when you have that angle right there. And if that guy is sitting there with the tablet and they're looking at the same thing and he's like, no, I saw that, you're going to get the play right more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, they have to do something. It shouldn't be as difficult as it is.
And just get rid of the pass interference challenge. Like, come on. It's so inconsistent.
All right, guys, that does it for our Thursday night preview. Let's wrap this up with some what to watch fors.
What to watch for.
In the early slate on Sunday, I'll be watching the Buccaneers head north to Atlanta to take on the surging Falcons. After their coaching shakeup on the defensive side of the football, Atlanta's much maligned secondary has suddenly shifted from a matchup we target for fantasy to one we potentially need to avoid. If Jameis Winston, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and the rest of the Tampa Bay passing weapons can't get going this week, we might need to rethink the way we look at guys like DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders, Deebo Samuel, and DJ Chark as we head into the fantasy playoff season.
My first what to watch for is the Cowboys at the Patriots. The Patriots D was exposed against Baltimore, and it led to their first loss of the year. This week, the Cowboys offense poses a very different threat, with 3 capable wide receivers in Cooper, Cobb, and Gallup, and then, of course, Zeke coming out of the backfield. Belichick and company are always really good at taking 1 or 2 weapons away almost completely. But this is a spot where the wily vet Randall Cobb could have plenty of room to operate, assuming Amari catches some combination of either Gilmore or the opposite corner and a safety, and Gallup gets either Gilmore or the opposite corner and a safety. Those guys are going to take away 3 defenders, leading to plenty of matchups underneath.
1, 2, 3.
All right, first up for me is the Giants at Bears in the earliest slate on Sunday. David Montgomery remains on benches despite being a scary play every week, and this game just feels like a trap. Against a Giants defense that's near the bottom of the league against the run, will Montgomery be a flex-level play this week, or will Tariq Cohen be the big beneficiary? If Joe's numbers on his connection with Chase Daniels hold true, this might be the nail in the coffin for Montgomery's redraft value in 2019.
My second what to watch for is the Seahawks at the Eagles. The Eagles secondary has been getting healthier and thus marginally better. Josh Gordon saw a few looks in the Seahawks win versus the Niners. And if you've added and stashed him and you're hoping to see him land 5 to 7 targets this week and start seeing some red zone, end zone looks as well. If the looks aren't there, it'll be safe to part with him after this week and make room in your roster for somebody with more upside.
Man, owning a Browns player in fantasy is precarious in 2019. However, on paper, this could be a get-right game for the Browns offense against a bad Miami team at home. Against a bottom 5 rush defense and a bottom 12 pass defense, this game should be a confidence builder for fantasy teams still in the hunt, with shares of OBJ, Landry, Chubb, and Hunt. Only time will tell.
1, 2, 3.
Sunday Night Football this week is going to be lit. The Niners were one of the most feared defenses in football just a few weeks ago, but they've shown some signs of weakness in 3 straight division matchups. After allowing just 11 points per game through the first 8 weeks of the season, an up-tempo approach has netted the Cardinals and Seahawks an average of 26 points per game. If the Packers can duplicate the blueprint the Arizona Cardinals and Seattle Seahawks have laid out Sunday night, things could get dicey for the Niners down the stretch. We circled San Francisco as a matchup to avoid for guys like Lamar Jackson, Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, and Jared Goff, plus the passing weapons in their respective offenses. But if this thing shoots out in Week 12, we may need to change our perspective on this defense during the fantasy playoffs.
All right, and that will do it. That's our Week 12 preview in the books. Guys, as this show releases, I'm now 29 years old. It's my birthday.
Happy birthday, Murph.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Oh,
Stop
God,
it,
were you going like, that'll be 3,
President.
Mr. President on that? Come on.
That'll be 3 if you do that song right now.
No, dude, that's only 2 1/4 because Joe vetoed the other one. So I
I don't
was at
care.
1 1/4
I'll
coming
make
in.
it 3 if you sing that song.
Nope, upheld, Jeff. You're all good.
You got what you were going to get out of me. I gave you that. That's it. We're done. We capped it right there. I knew I had room to work with, though, so I was good. I worked within my buffer.
All right, guys, we'll be back on Tuesday next week to break down Week 12, see what we got wrong, see what we got right, and hopefully make fun of Joe for losing cheap dates.
Well,
Maybe.
I don't think we're doing that.
Well, if you win, Jeff will definitely bring up that you stole his entire cheap date lineup from, our last show. So,
I mean, we talked about some guys. Some guys came up. We'll
I think
see.
the only
We'll
guy
see.
that we talked about that I stole from you is Baker Mayfield because you could have played Kareem Hunt too. He wasn't a cheap date. Hey, quick before we go, I just want to mention Mark Wemkin and I of the Roto Bros podcast have decided to do a weekly main slate DFS breakdown podcast. It's not going to be released on our normal channel anymore. You have to be on our Patreon or their Patreon to get it. There's a guy in our Discord chat that the Roto Bros have that has already increased his bankroll to over $1,000 with the advice we've given him. So it's worth it. Just costs $5 a month and you get that podcast every single week. We're even going to release it for the Thanksgiving slate. So go check that out.
And if you want to get a preview of that, go back and listen. There was one last week, and I do believe the week before on our channel that you can go check out and kind of see what he's talking about. They're great shows. Fantastic stuff. All right, guys, until Tuesday, for Joe at Human Stat Sheet on Twitter, for Jeff at NFL_DiMatteo, and of course, myself at MurphyFFT, or find us all in the NFL Fantasy Football Discussion Group on Facebook. Bye, guys.
Later.
1 1/4 dad jokes means I can bring you 4 3/4 dad jokes next week.
Gross.
No.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Takeaway Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow the show on Twitter at FF Takeaway.
Sorry, man. I'm banking them.